Good morning. My name is Don Michaelman, and I welcome you to the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. This is, I hereby call to order the Thursday, January 13th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We have 4 members of the commission available, 3 in person and 1 online. It will take a unanimous vote of all 4 to pass an item on that. We have guests, Council Member Rusing and Council Member Montoya, and Brandon's going to be joining us quite a bit, I understand, in the near future. And we have Tyler in the back and Leslie. I'll introduce Leslie when we get to that section there too. Staff members will introduce themselves when they come up on that. This is an open public hearing and is being tape recorded and videotaped by the city. Excuse me. The proceedings are being televised by representatives of the public media, the public, local cable and/or radio stations, and may also be rebroadcast. And as I mentioned before, we have 4 members present, and we'll take 4 members for a majority on the vote. As some individuals may be attending this meeting remotely, all parties wishing to be heard, including commission members, are required to state their name prior to speaking in order to ensure accurate minutes. Members of the public, when called upon, are required to state their name and address for the record so that we may know who is speaking and be able to contact them at a later date. I'd like to have the commission members introduce themselves. And Tom, would you go first since you are on remote?
Sure. My name is Tom Hutchison. It's a wonderful day here in Prescott, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in some upfront planning.
Okay, thank you.
Ted Gambogi. Butch Tracy.
Okay, thank you. First item on the agenda is the minutes from the December 9th, 2021 meeting. Are there any corrections? If not, is there a motion concerning the minutes?
Yeah, Butch Tracy. I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I second it. Ted Gambogi.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, why don't we do a roll call vote since we have 1 member online?
I'll go ahead and do that. Commissioner Hutchison? You may need to unmute yourself. Commissioner Hutchison, how do you vote on the minutes?
I approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Gambogi?
Approve.
Commissioner Tracy?
Approve.
Chairman Michelson?
Approve. Next item is we're going to be hearing a presentation on the Granite Creek Corridor Plan from Leslie Dornfield with Planet Communities. And again, Leslie, it's good to see you face to face after Zooming so many times.
Commissioner Michelman?
Yes.
Chair Michelman, before we do that, because we've had a change in city leadership since the time that the commission last met, I wanted to point out that, as you did, that we have a new council liaison, Council Member Brandon Montoya, and he's with us this morning, and we wanted to take a moment to let him introduce himself to the commission and to the folks in the room. Brandon?
Thank you, Bren. I just wanted to say hi to you guys. I had an opportunity to talk to you, those of you who are in person here this morning before the start of the meeting. I just want to let you guys know, as I've talked to some of you guys about this morning, I view the Planning and Zoning Commission as kind of the first line of defense or a vetting board for the City Council. So I look forward to working closely with you guys, and I'm going to make every effort possible to attend these meetings in person when I can. But this morning I'll have to leave shortly after the end of Leslie's presentation probably, but I'll be following the meetings and taking advantage of the recording of the meetings too. So please, if you have questions of me, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and Bryn has all my contact information if I haven't given it to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Montoya. Also, before we get started with Leslie's presentation, I wanted to invite Tyler Goodman, who is the Deputy City Manager here at the City of Prescott. He is the project oversight for the Granite Creek Corridor Plan, and he's going to introduce Ms. Dornfeld.
Thank you, Bryn, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. Tyler Goodman, happy to be here, and this has been a really good, and it's turning out to be a pretty long process, but maybe for planning, not so long. Just a little bit of background. We brought Leslie and her team on board at the end of 2020 and started work shortly thereafter. We had a lot of stakeholder meetings, public survey, community meetings. I don't know how many groups we've met with over Zoom. We did a walkthrough. So we've done a lot of work on this, and happy to introduce Leslie Dornfeld. She's been a great partner for the city, and she has a lot of great information. So I will hand it off to her.
I'm going to, hold on. Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Dornfeld, and my firm is Planet, and I'm here to talk to you about the Granite Creek Area Plan. I just wanted to, thank you for some time, and before, to just get used to this, okay, and before I really start talking about the plan per se, I just wanted to give you a little more context, add a little bit to what Tyler said and Bryn said. About a year ago, we started this process, and this is a plan that came out of the city manager's office. And the genesis for the plan was the investment in Granite Creek that the city is making, which many of you know is substantial. And as I've worked through this plan, I realize what a important piece of Prescott Granite Creek is to its residents. The property owners and business owners around Granite Creek saw this as a way to maybe help raise the profile of their area and the downtown by leveraging this investment and hopefully using it to promote some economic development and the downtown as well. And so as a result, they worked with the city manager's office, and there was a council discussion, and through some of the, I think it was the CARES Act money, wasn't it? And through some of the CARES Act money, they decided to go ahead and really look to the future of Prescott so it could be more resilient in the face of change and in the face of some of the economic challenges that we were facing at the time, and we may face different types of challenges in the future. So as a result, the Granite Creek Area Plan was born, and our firm was fortunate enough to be selected to work with the city on it. Just to remind many of you, you've seen some of this presentation before. It's not just me. There's a team behind me. It includes Rick Merritt from Elliott D. Pollock & Company. He's our economist, and he did a lot of market work on the downtown. We had a traffic analyst, Dean Chambers from Lokahi Engineering. And then we also had someone to help us with design, and you'll see quite a bit of that in this project. And his name is Kurt Nagel, and they're from CKTRL, Callison, CRTKL, and they're actually out of California. So the rest of us are all local. I've been in Arizona over 25 years and been practicing here for that long as well. So, you know, we're located in Phoenix, and we really care about this area. Been coming down to Prescott, up to Prescott for years and years and years. So with that, I'm going to start the plan. Instead of your traditional PowerPoint, this is an online plan. As you can see right there, that's your plan. It's a digital document. You can access it on your phone as well as access it on your computer. So you're always able to see it. And one of the reasons we went to this type of a document is really this is where most stuff is moving online. People just don't carry around big pieces of paper, printouts of paper anymore. The plan includes 8 sections, and I have to put my glasses on to see. There we go. The plan includes 8 sections. The meat of the plan is really sections 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8. The first 3 sections, just one kind of talk to you about how to navigate the plan. I'm not going to go through that now, but for those of you that haven't looked at it and may want to look at it online, this is a good section to tell you how to just get through it and some of the features in it. It's an interactive plan. The next section is acknowledgments, and you can get to each of these sections. I've just, for the sake of speed, so that the maps pull up, put them in different tabs, but you can get to any one of these sections by clicking on them, and you'll move to the acknowledgments and executive summary. This will bring you back to your table of contents, so to speak. But we have the mayor and the city council, but one of the reasons that I pulled up this section is I did want to point out to you that we really did have a robust working group. And we met with them several times during the planning process, and they gave us a lot of really good feedback. This plan is really shaped around 5 big ideas. And we got these ideas as a result of a public process that I'll talk about in one moment. But the really big ideas were, one, that we recognize that this part of the downtown really needs to serve a market that's a little bit, needs to diversify the downtown. And in order to do so, it needs to be a little bit different. And I always struggle when I say this in Prescott because I don't want anyone to think that I don't think that the downtown and the Courthouse Plaza is one of the most amazing places in the state, because it is. And it's actually regionally in the Southwest pretty important. But what's also got to happen is people need to come downtown. Maybe they come to a couple of festivals, but maybe they want to also do something else. Maybe they want to have a little bit of a different experience. And the Granite Creek corridor area really is that opportunity. Downtown Prescott is one of the few downtowns in the state that is so closely connected to a water source like this. And it's a real opportunity that I think, and I think some of the people along the corridor and in the downtown realize, is a real benefit. And tons of people come to the Granite Creek corridor. A lot of the people that come to the downtown don't even know Granite Creek is there. And so it's a real resource. And so to next gen that corridor, it's how do we leverage that resource and really connect to it, which is our big idea too. How do we connect? And we'll talk a little bit about those tools as we go through each of these. The third thing is to incentivize. There are some obstacles to developing in the downtown, and incentivize helps us address some of those. And the fourth idea is design, and I'll spend a little bit of time on that as well. We want people to know when they come to the Granite Creek area that it is part of the downtown, but it's a little bit different than what they expect from the historic downtown. So it has a little bit of a different feel. It has different kind of uses. And then to help people navigate through this area, we think wayfinding is also important. I presented this to the Bicycle, Pedestrian, and Transportation Circulation Committee on Monday. And one of the comments we got is, well, you could do this throughout the whole downtown. And in fact, you could if you wanted. But this plan really applies to the Granite Creek area. Let me go here first. This is the planning area, which will come up in a minute. Here we go. This is one of the kind of cool features of this thing. So all of these maps are what we call interactive, and you can click on the maps and get different information about them. You can also blow them up. You can make them even larger if you want to look at a specific piece of property. You can bring them down. And many of them, when you click on it, you'll get a pop-up that shows you what the information is that's trying to get shown. So this is the study area. It generally starts north of the Hilton Garden Hotel, pretty much at the splash pad area, and comes all the way down to Aubrey Street. It's generally bounded by Monte Rosa Street on the east and McCormick Street on the west, and it zigs and zags a little bit along Granite Street to the north. The planning process, as Tyler mentioned, is was pretty lengthy. We did start about a year ago doing this. We had, as part of our planning process, discussions with focused business groups and property owner groups, and through the plan, you can click on any of these links and find out more about that information. You can see, for example, this is the focus group summary. We also had 2 online community meetings. We had, and there are summaries of those meetings embedded in the plan. We met with the Granite Creek Corridor Working Group 4 separate times, and one of those times was a walkthrough of the Granite Creek area where people got to point out specific things. And then we also did separate presentations to a variety of community groups, and we'll be doing the Historic Preservation Advisory Committee tomorrow. We've also been before you, and once before with a draft plan. We were before council with a draft plan, and now we're coming back with you. Some of the things that we learned through the process and through our analyses, we did transportation and economic analyses of the area. We did a land use analysis. We learned a lot of different things. And when you can click on these little dots when you go through the plan, and what will come up as an example of the different analysis factors. It's taking, maybe I didn't get it there. There we go. But so then here's some opportunities for Creekside, and we have a photo of what that opportunity is, although it doesn't want to come up here. I guess it's just taking its time. But one of the things that's really important about the Granite Creek quarter is where it's located, which is within the downtown. What we've also noticed is that views of the quarter were very limited. So when you walk on Monte Rosa or Montezuma Street, you don't really know Granite Creek is there. You know it's there only if you're walking through on Goodwin Street or on Gurley Street. Thank you. And the access signs to the creek are small. They're not really hard to find. There's a lot of unmaintained access points to the creek, especially towards the north. That really doesn't help the connection between the creek or the quarter because it doesn't complement either one. That there are opportunities to access the creek mid-block, and that would be a way of opening the creek up to the quarter more and connecting them better. Another opportunity we saw is the Mile High School. It anchors the quarter on the south end, and over time, as uses may change in that school, there are some opportunities there that we don't want to leave out. And then the real east-west connections are pretty much limited to existing streets. One of the other things we found out through our economic study is that there's really limited housing within the quarter. And what we found out is the people that live in the quarter are typically older and poorer than the typical downtown Prescott resident. And so one of the things we want to be able to do is increase the amount of housing in the quarter so we increase the activity in the quarter and provide a market for more uses. And then the last thing we found out is that a lot of the buildings within the quarter, in particular on the south end, are obsolete in design, and so it makes it harder to repurpose them. Another important thing that we learned is that most of the quarter is within the flood zone, and it makes redevelopment very difficult. And in fact, yesterday, when we were meeting with the property and business owners, one large building owner talked about how difficult this flood zone designation was making it for him to repurpose and redesignate his building. And we actually yesterday modified the plan to just encourage ongoing maintenance of the Granite Creek so that it doesn't cross its bank and stays where it's supposed to stay so people can continue to operate safely. And there are also some, historic designations that make a lot of the renovations a little bit more difficult as well. So we've included a bunch of resources in the plan to help folks. And then, as I mentioned, there's a lot of obsolescence in the corridor where you either have to walk through a large parking lot to get to a building or the size and the shape of a building is obsolete. So, based on all that, again, we ended up with these big ideas of how to address development and redevelopment and connecting the quarter to the creek. And now I'm going to go through each one of those. So the first big idea is to next gen the quarter. And really what we're saying is we want to diversify the types of opportunities you have downtown. Right now, people come to Prescott, they're coming to Courthouse Square, or they're coming to kayak on a lake, or they're coming to hike at Granite Creek. We want them to come downtown to experience Granite Creek downtown and experience the Granite Creek quarter as well. Or when they stay, maybe they'll stay an extra day, have another hotel room, or a resident will make the decision to drive down into the Granite Creek quarter for an experience. Or maybe someone will decide to live there. So how do we do that? The first way we do that is to create a unique identity. The second things that we're recommending within this idea is to create some unique land uses, then to encourage the kind of development we want, to catalyze it, to manage the stormwater, and also to just enhance the creek a little bit. And so within each of these topic areas here, and I can click on any one of these and jump to the topic area, we have specific strategies that talk about how to accomplish that topic. So for the unique identity, what we recommend is creating 3 areas or precincts that each have their own identity. So the work identity is, the work precinct is basically the northern end of the quarter. And what it really does is it plays off the fact that the city is moving its new city hall here. You've already got the Hilton Garden Inn. There's not a lot of residences in this area. You're adjacent to the shopping center. It's really an area where it's business and commercial. And so the predominant use type we're recommending in that area is business and commercial. The next precinct, which is ends at Goodwin Street, is the Play Precinct. And the Play Precinct is adjacent to the Courthouse Square Plaza. You notice that we don't include the plaza within the planning area and also the frontage of Montezuma Street. We have the Whiskey Row as our boundary here. But the Play Precinct is really entertainment uses, museums, cultural uses. And again, it really plays off most of the uses that are there. I call this area sort of the North Downtown, and we include a little bit of what you might want to call that North Downtown area, but it's mostly commercial shopping and dining and eating. And then the southern area is what we're calling the Live Precinct. And the Live Precinct really encourages higher density residential developments and mixed use. Again, not one of these precincts are exclusive to the other uses. It's just there's a predominant use. And in the Live Precinct, the predominant use we're encouraging is residential, so that we can bring some folks in, and hopefully they'll support some of the restaurants and dining in the Play Precinct, and theoretically they could work in the Work Precinct. So how do we go about creating this identity? One, we're saying through signing. Two, encouraging unique activities that are appropriate to the quarter. So there was a lot of talk about maybe putting a farmer's market on the school field. I know the farmer's market's at the park now, but maybe over time there might be a way to put other kinds of crafts markets there in addition to the Courthouse Plaza. I know that Prescott is probably a premier summer market venue, so maybe think about opening up some other locations for that. And then also to really encourage these unique land uses, create an overlay district. And this specifically does lay in the lap of the Planning and Zoning Commission that would really encourage certain uses and prohibit others. And the uses that specifically we'd like to prohibit throughout this quarter are single-family detached residential. They really don't belong in this quarter, or they're really not a downtown kind of use we want to recommend. Gas stations or automotive sales, those typically conflict with pedestrian activities, car repair parts and service. We're not saying to take these uses out if they exist, but what we're saying is if a new use would want to come in, to not encourage it, or if a use were to want to change its zoning or change its permit so that it could be more of what it is, and it's one of these uses, to maybe encourage them to look at another use or another location to do that. We also want to discourage surface parking. We know parking is at a premium, and we have some recommendations for parking in the downtown. We don't want to see outdoor storage, large hospitals or institutions, excluding education, schools, and industrial or industrial fabrication. I mean, that's kind of heavy stuff that would occur outdoors. So those uses would be prohibited in the downtown. And in large part, they are now already, but this would just emphasize it. But then there are things that we want to encourage in the downtown. One is makerspace. And this idea of makerspace is the idea where someone sells something. It could be jewelry, it could be cool woodworking, it could be art, and the front part of their space is used as a sales or a retail venue, and the back part is where they do their making, their fabricating. These are typically indoor operations. And what's really cool about makerspace is it's one of the major players in sort of this grow local movement, which has become one of the bigger economic development movements. And, most of the employment in the U.S. is in small businesses. It's not in large businesses. And it's these small businesses that really promote and begin to grow your economy. And we think there's an opportunity to do this in the quarter and really attract someone that's kind of looking for that, locally grown, locally made kind of use. And we have some examples of this in the plan. The other opportunity we think exists is co-work space. Especially with the pandemic, people go into the office maybe once a week. So a lot of them are using co-work spaces where they'll have meetings or they'll bring their team together once or twice a week. There's a lot of these now in the Valley that are growing. We think it's a tremendous opportunity in Prescott. You're a premier residential environment. There's no reason you can't have co-work space in Prescott. Someone can work in New York and live in Prescott and come into their co-work space when they need to come into it. We've got some examples of those kinds of uses as well in the plan. And then another kind of use is the idea of live workspace, where people have a studio or an office on the bottom floor, and then they're able to live in the areas above it. And there's a bunch of these also that are beginning to happen throughout the state. This is an example of a hotel that was purchased called the Oasis in Phoenix on Grand Avenue. And on the third Friday, it's mostly artists. It's designed as an artist hotel. The artists open up the patios, and they use those as selling spaces. And when it's not Third Thursday, they close their doors and they live there. And it's a really great space. But here are some other examples of these live workspaces that are throughout the United States and are very successful. And they really do improve an area. One of the other things that we're recommending is alley-facing development. And we'll talk about this more in the connect part, but we do see the alley as a tremendous asset throughout the corridor. So this is an example in Detroit of an alley-facing development. This is an example of an artist rendering using an alley in downtown Phoenix along Roosevelt Row of how these alleys could be redeveloped. And this picture actually is the built product. It's a photographer's picture, so we got all the people out of it. But they are really cool things, and we think that beginning to have developments that not only face the street and the alley or the creek and the alley can really begin to connect this area together and connect it to the creek. In terms of appropriate development, this really focuses on the Mile High School. Over time, should this school transition to another use, we think this is a tremendous opportunity. We think there are a lot of opportunities to multipurpose the field so that we can add an amenity to the play precinct. And then the third opportunity that we see is the school drop-off area here along McCormick Street in the south end of the district. Right now, it's a dirt lot with a fence. And there's a lot of other ways to accomplish this bus drop-off area. For example, you could put residential in and keep the school bus stop there. And you could begin to activate the area and really connect it more to the residential areas, to the west of it and the creek to the east of it. And all of our strategies are organized into mid, short, and long term because we know this isn't going to happen overnight. Another strategy is to catalyze redevelopment. And basically what we've done is identify sites that we think could be transformative within the Granite Creek area, and then talk about the kind of development we think could happen. And we're not saying the city should go out and buy these sites, but there are lots of other ways we could catalyze development. We can work with the property owners. Property owners are willing. We could advertise these sites on the City Economic Development webpage. We could even have a Prescott Granite Creek Corridor page that could identify these sites and the opportunities for them. And this ties into some of the ideas we recommend in the incentivize section. I'll be talking about those in a minute. And then we also are recommending managing stormwater. We actually modeled this district light. We did not do sophisticated modeling on it, but we did look at this district. We know the city is working to reduce the width of the floodplain, but what we learned is that it's pretty unlikely at this point that the floodplain is going to get reduced to the area of the creek. So while the city's efforts may reduce in shrinking the floodplain down a little bit, the properties next to the creek and probably along McCormick and Montezuma are going to remain in the flood area. That doesn't mean we should just throw up our hands and say, there's nothing we can do. There's lots of ways we can do development and design that reduce stormwater flows. And so what we're recommending is that as we do new development and design, to just think of ways to reduce those flows at any opportunity possible, just so that stormwater, if it occurs, won't be as damaging. And then in terms of enhancement, when you walk through Granite Creek itself, it can be a pretty uninviting environment, and we know that the money the city is investing in it really will change the environment of the creek, but we also want people to connect that creek to the area outside of it. And so maybe painting retaining walls or putting signing on retaining walls that says, hey, drink here with an arrow, something really fun, or eat here, or that identify a park that's adjacent to the creek, on the east side of the creek where it's higher or on the west side of the creek where it's lower. People could know and see how the creek connects to this environment better. So this has been done also throughout the U.S. This is an example of what Albuquerque has done to create these pavement art pieces that identify they're near a river or a creek in Albuquerque and show creek entrance, and it really does enhance the area. So that's right now where we're at with to next gen the area. There are just a lot of big picture things that we could do. And I can I'll go to the next section. Yeah? Okay. Just stop me when you want me to stop. The next big idea we have is connect, and this really talks about connecting the corridor. And again, just in terms of navigating the plan, we have print sections if you just want to print this out and read it, or you're sitting somewhere where you don't have internet access. But also in the beginning of each section, we remind people of where the corridor is, because since this plan is so interactive. You know, if someone just clicks on it, we want them to understand where the planning area is at all times. So there's 6 ideas for Connect, this big idea. There's 6 ways we're thinking this big idea could get implemented. One is to create a pedestrian alley. Another idea is to activate it. A third idea is to increase the number of mid-block connections that exist and enhance them. Enhance the environment for walking, providing bicycle facilities, and also addressing motorized circulation and transit. So in terms of creating a pedestrian-friendly alley, this is really, I would say, one of the more important pieces of the plan. And it really does solidly connect the corridor to Granite Creek. You see Granite Creek is this green area here. And what we're recommending is taking the Whiskey Row Alley and extending it north and south throughout the corridor area. And so the south area would be adjacent to the ball field. Again, you can see why we look at that as an opportunity site. To connect the whole area. So someone could, for example, go to the hotel or the park, and maybe they would see a really cool alley entrance, and they would walk down this alley and experience the corridor. They could just do a loop if they felt like working out or just doing something fun like that. But really making sure the creek is connected to the alley and the corridor, and then also through some other ideas, mid-block connections, enhancing those connections and making them more permeable.
Can I stop you for a second? May I?
Sure, it's up to you.
Want to come up?
That alley, you said it's an extension of Whiskey.
Just so that we get notice. Tell them who you are, please. Where you live.
Ted Gambogi. The alley you're talking about, that's on Whiskey Row?
Whiskey Row in north and south, yeah.
On the street itself?
Yes, we're saying use the actual alley itself.
The alley behind Whiskey Row?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I misspoke, yeah. The Whiskey Row Alley. My bad. Thank you so much for that catch. So one of the ways that you can just do this in the short term, and it's kind of fun, is called using quick build street design. Quick build is just a way of using temporary enhancements and improvements, things that you can move, things that you can take away easy, things that are easily done to just let people know the alley exists. This is an example of just painting a street. And this is in Honolulu, but I will tell you that when we did the Grand Avenue, Greening Lower Grand Avenue corridor, there was a lot of recommendations to create bump outs into the street and enhance crosswalks. The artists in the area went to Home Depot, got a paint donation, and they painted this incredible crosswalk with the, because it used to be a state highway with state highway signs all the way across that stays there today. So there's lots of quick build things that you can do that let people know changes are coming, and you really want to begin to turn an area around. You can do other things like pull out areas of pavement and without moving the curb and gutter. This is also something that we used on Grand Avenue. This is not from Grand Avenue, and plant them or increase safety. And I know you already have those planners along Montezuma Street across from the Courthouse Plaza. So maybe do some more of those at the corners of the alley and where the alley has connections at major streets. Another really key thing to do is activating the alley. And this includes just why one should do it. Activate, getting people in that alley is clearly the most important, is clearly the most important thing that you can do, and making it a place that people want to go to. And you know that from Whiskey Row Alley, but you really need to do more. And so we've provided in the plan a bunch of examples of alleys that have done that and really created a space in them. Again, this kind of quick build design concept using temporary enhancements. Here are examples of alleys where restaurants just put tables out. They pull them in when they're closed at night, but it's something that people can use. You can either let the tables be a public amenity or not. There are some little bit more permanent but removable enhancements in other alleys that are used. And again, we talk about all of these different projects in the plan. One of the things that was specifically mentioned to us is what do we do with a dumpster? There's actually a company that paints dumpsters, but a cool alley event could be having a dumpster paint-in, where you invite the community and local artists to come and paint some dumpsters and make them give the alley an identity. And different parts of the alley could have different identities. And then again, this idea of holding the regular events in the alley, regular first day events. And I know that downtown used to do something like this. I think, do you still do this or not? I don't think so. But having these regular first or third or second event really does help. And in the beginning, you know, you have to have some perseverance, but they do take off. And then most importantly, in the midterm is to really develop a funding plan, look at ways of putting some green infrastructure in that alley so you can help reduce flooding. And then in terms of connecting, also another idea is creating mid-block connections. You already have some mid-block connections that connect Courthouse Plaza mid-block to the uses on north and east and west of it. But this plan recommends a whole bunch more of mid-block connections within the quarter. Most of these connections are through existing parking lot or through the sides of buildings. So what this map does is identify opportunities for these so that when renovation or redevelopment occurs, if this overlay district exists and you have this mid-block connection concept in it, you could say, hey, you know, let's figure out a way to make a connection through this block. And mid-block connections aren't just strips. What we're envisioning them as is another frontage for the building. So for example, if you have buildings with ground floor retail, which you really need to have in this area because of the flood zone, the mid-block connection frontage could either be a window or it could be a side dining area. It could be another entrance. And I know that multiple entrances in retail is a tricky discussion, but just even having that window frontage, or if you were a coffee shop, or having those side areas to sit in, could really be an opportunity to change what this district looks like and very strongly connect it to the creek. And one of the other opportunities with these mid-block connections would be maybe where they meet the creek to create sitting areas or outdoor passive relaxation areas, and those could potentially be done in partnership with the city.
Another question.
You should sit here.
These mid-block connections, do they cross the street?
There would be, so you would see ways to have those cross the street, yes, and they would be marked.
And has there been any studies impact on traffic accidents, pedestrian traffic accidents?
It's a great question. We haven't studied them in the downtown, but in the long haul, typically the speeds are slow enough here within the downtown that they're not really hazardous to pedestrians. Typically the speeds in the downtown are under 40 or 35 miles an hour. To increase safety, there are lots of things that you can do. You can mark them out. You can raise them on platforms. There are things called hawks and pelicans, which are lights that are actually designed mid-block for pedestrians. Those are in much more intense traffic situations. But, you know, what I find, or what I've noticed in the downtown, and certainly isn't the result of a scientific study, is that during events, traffic doesn't move.
Yeah.
People are crossing all over the place anyway. So, you know, I don't think it would be a big step in the downtown to do that.
Thank you.
Sure. Another excellent question. Thank you. Here's an example in the downtown, for example, where a mid-block crossing opportunity could occur. These are, some of these are residential, some of these are commercial, but you could increase the commercial usage by creating an alley here, maybe putting seating outside, maybe putting a window in, and it would really change the feel and the connection to the alley. Here's an opportunity through a parking lot where a mid-block connection could access the creek. You might envision a small park or seating area here. And again, all of these would have to happen with property owner consent, working with the property owner. But since this district envisions a little bit more intensity going up, as these areas redevelop, there might be some opportunities to do this. Here are some examples of creeks and connections to creeks. This is taken mostly from San Antonio and Albuquerque, but you can see these red areas here are places that we're saying create passive recreation areas at these mid-block connections within the corridor. And then this goes to the question that just happened when we clearly define or signalize these mid-block crossings. And some of them we recognize are pretty high intensity. So this map identifies where those potential mid-block crossings could be at the street level and where you might want to look at some ways of managing pedestrian traffic. And then in the long term, some of the things we're recommending under mid-block connections are bridges. And this is something the Parks Department has also looked at and agrees with. There are some opportunities to put bridges across the creek. Bridges don't have to be very expensive and heavy. They can be light and drop in. And we think these are opportunities to better connect the corridor across the street through these mid-block crossings so that it better brings the corridor together. Enhancing the walk environment really has to do with improving the sidewalks. But one of the other big ideas in enhancing the walk environment is creating a trail, what we're calling an above the bank shared use path, all along Granite Creek area. And there is an opportunity to do that. You can see an example. This is a much more hard surfaced example, but where the creek is high on one side and low on the other side. This is from San Antonio, where they created a enhanced creek walk. We think this would be a really great opportunity in the downtown. There is room to do it. We've looked at it. And the other thing is it would create some more ADA access, which was something that was mentioned to us in the Bicycle and Pedestrian and Circulation Committee. You can see here where there might be an opportunity to create an above the creek corridor. Then some of the longer-term actions to enhance the sidewalks for an enhanced walk environment is another strategy one can use. Here's an example of some enhanced sidewalks. But here's another great example that we love, just where you take out some parking and enhance the sidewalk with outdoor dining. This is in your downtown. And then also providing bicycle facilities. Bicycle facilities are really great opportunities. There's a really strong bike community in Prescott. And the reason this lane is green, just for your information, which is why we included, is the green actually reduces the ambient heat in the area. It doesn't, when the sun goes down and black releases heat, green doesn't release as much because it doesn't absorb as much. So it's just another way to be a little bit more environmental and sustainable. Putting in bike facilities, shared bike rentals, bike racks throughout the area is another opportunity. And then in terms of circulation, this is really the motorized portion of Connect. You know, we recognize that as more people live in this area and as more people use this area, they're going to begin to look at other ways of moving around in it and getting to it. So one of the things that is growing in popularity, obviously, is rideshare. And so one of the things we recommend is providing rideshare facilities. I might mention this is a rideshare area in downtown Gilbert. So they've already bought into the concept and they have rideshare areas. And you can use curbside areas for that. One of the other good things about rideshare areas in downtown Prescott, if you wanted to think about in the corridor, putting them in the alleys, is you could also combine these with drop-off areas and loading areas. So they're always open areas that are never taken up by anything else but truck deliveries or rideshare. Another opportunity is what we're calling micro-mobility hubs. These are places where transit, bicycles, and pedestrians and cars all come together. And so you can transfer from one mode to another very easily. And micro-mobility hubs don't always include all modes, but Prescott is growing. And one of the things to think about is the northern area, which is growing a lot. And one day Prescott will have a lot more transit than it has now. And so as people want to maybe live downtown and work in the north area, and that area will be an important employment hub, you're already the largest employer in the region, this kind of a micro-mobility hub idea might be great. You walk to the bus stop, you take the bus up to the regional airport area, your job up there, you do your job, and then at night you come home and you come down to work. Or as transit gets moved throughout the community, or people want to take transit from Prescott Valley into the downtown because they want to have a night where they drink and they don't want to drive, these micro-mobility hubs are real opportunities to encourage that kind of movement and also reduce the parking demand, give you a little bit more area to work with, and keep people coming downtown. One of our other recommendations is to calm Willis Goodwin and Montezuma Streets, calm the traffic on it. And that could be by narrowing lanes, adding parking, adding some of these non-parking options that you already have in the street. This image is not downtown Prescott. It's from what's called the NACTO Guide, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And NACTO is sort of the premier agency for working in more urban areas and dealing with transportation. So you can connect to the NACTO Guide and look at any of that. And we know parking is a huge issue in the downtown. And in the short term, we really do recommend increasing parking capacity. And we've got some specific recommendations there and ways to do it. But the other thing that we're also recommending is adding a new parking garage in the northern portion of the planning area. And we know this isn't immediate, but we think in the long term, given the development that's going on up there, given the fact that the city hall is moving up there, you'll probably need a new parking area and a new garage. And so we're recommending a garage that's wrapped by retail on the bottom. So that's our big idea 2, Circuit Connect. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to move to big idea 3. Incentivize. It gets a little less dense except for design. So incentivize talks really about how do we encourage economic development within the corridor, new and redevelopment. So we have a few very specific ideas, and most of these would have to occur in partnership with the city. So the city would have to work with the business and property owners in the area to do this. The first one is called an enhanced services district, and they're called, typically people call them bids. They're used in Tucson, they're used in Flagstaff, they're used in Phoenix, more than once. And what an enhanced service district does is allows property owners to tax themselves and manage how they want to spend that additional tax money. So they can spend it on capital improvements, they could spend it on police, they could spend it on security, they could spend it on a marketing entity to market the area, hire someone to do that. But what's cool about these enhanced services districts is the people within the district control the expenditures of money for the district, and you form them yourself.
Leslie, when you're talking about they would tax themselves, would that be like a tax on the business, or the business would tax their customers?
It's a property tax.
Property tax. Okay, thank you.
So we have a bunch of information on how this could occur. We have information on other business improvement districts that exist. But in the case of the downtown, we think it's a tremendous opportunity. And we also you just talked about taxing. Here are some of the ways you can look at how to figure your tax. So it's not like someone comes in and slaps a tax on you. It's you decide among yourselves how you want to tax yourself if you decide to go ahead with this. And then I think the city has to be a partner to approve the district. Another short-term action is use that district to catalyze some investment. And we're thinking that especially in terms of the connect portion, the mid-block portion, those quick design options, that's a real opportunity for this type of a district. They're low cost, quick improvements that people can really see things are changing. One of the other things we think is to promote capital and entrepreneurship. And an engineering firm I used to work with says if it isn't measured, it can't be built, or it can't really happen. And I don't really believe that, but I do believe that sometimes the measurements really help people make much better decisions about whether to reinvest or to invest in an area. And so one of the things that we're recommending, and this would, again, either be through funding that is raised through a bid or through the existing partnerships you have or through the city, to begin to monitor the economic activity within the district, maybe monitor pedestrian traffic, maybe monitor sales activity, so people can see that this is a growing area over time. Another opportunity might be to create a page on the city's website that talks about what's going on in the corridor, the events in the corridor, and as I mentioned before, maybe available properties in the corridor and the kinds of development that we're looking for in this area. Within private partnerships, which is the fourth kind of strategy, excuse me, for incentivize, one of the things we're recommending is creating a redevelopment area, creating out of the Granite Creek corridor. And a redevelopment area is a really strong tool because when used in partnership with a central business district designation, which can come in a general plan or just as a designation by its own, the city is able to use GPLET, which is called a government property lease excise tax. And you can use GPLET without the CBD core designation, but when you have that CBD designation, GPLET is much stronger. And it allows you to defer taxes on a property that the government owns for 8 years. And given the floodplain designations in the downtown, which increase the cost of development substantially, we think GPLET's an important tool. It's used by many, many successful downtowns in Phoenix, and it's just about your only financing tool you have. The city's aware of it, we've talked with them, and we think it would be a relatively straightforward way to identify this as a redevelopment area and then designate it as a central business district. And what's nice about GPLET is a developer doesn't just get it as of right. The city chooses when to use it. So we can use it to promote the development we want within the corridor. It's just not, you can't, you wouldn't be able to go and say, well, you could if the city chose, but an example could be someone wanting to build, a paper processing plant in the downtown and asking for gyplet. The city might say, that's probably not the best use of that land. We don't want you to do it with gyplet. And so they won't use gyplet. But if somebody came and said, hey, I want to build this mixed-use live-work project with residences on the top in the live district, the city might say, we're on it. And what do you need for help? And he might say, it's too expensive. Well, we have gyplet. And so that can help really reduce some of those costs. And again, working to reduce the risk of flooding by keeping the creek maintained so that it doesn't overflow its bank. And then the last idea and incentivize is reducing development costs. One of the other ways we can reduce development costs is creating an infill incentive district, which, and the city largely does a lot of this already, waive the fees for rezoning, for building permits, for any kind of a fee that, again, can help to reduce the cost of development. And, if you're building a $30 million project, everything helps. And if you're building a $10,000 project, everything helps as well. So again, if the city really wants to encourage development, it could say for the kinds of development that are in conformance with this plan, we do want to waive fees because we want to encourage it. So that's the incentivized portion.
Excuse me. Leslie, how recent are these floodplain and flood zone? When was the last time FEMA did that? I mean, is this something that's going to come up in the near future, or has it been done fairly soon?
I know the city's working on it, so I was just going to look for you. So
Yeah, I can touch on that. So our Public Works Department, they've been in the process for at least a year, maybe two now. They've hired a private consultant to help with that, and they just submitted reviewed information to FEMA for them to review. Now, what they've done, because, and you're probably aware of our parallel project, the Granite Creek Master Plan, which is actually the creek and the trail itself. As we designed that project, we assumed that it would be a no-rise situation, and we actually might lower the floodplain through this stretch. So what Public Works did is they took about that 1 mile stretch from Aubrey to Granite Creek Park. They took that out of their studies with their third-party consultant, and that will be reassessed once we have the improvements completed from that capital project and resubmitted to FEMA once that is done. We plan to start that capital project hopefully around fall of this year. If everything goes right, I'm knocking on all the wood I can in this room. And we expect an expedited review from FEMA, considering we just submitted all the other city data to FEMA this year. In fact, actually, it was the end of last year.
Is that something the city typically does on other creeks and other evaluations from FEMA?
You mean pull it out of?
Yes, or just like they went through Aspen Creek and fairly recently, a few years back,
right,
and made those designations, made it wider, made it narrower, whatever. Is that something the city normally goes in and does and reevaluates?
I'm not sure on that. I know that for this particular round of review, Public Works submitted everything in the city except for this 1 mile stretch. They may submit other stretches of creek or other impacted areas as the need arises to get further review and hopefully some better results from FEMA. But I'd have to defer to them on that one. I'm not sure.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Appreciate it.
Okay, next section. Whoops. Design. So this is a substantial portion of what could be included in the overlay. And if you remember in the beginning, one of the things that we wanted to do by next-genning this quarter, and one of our big ideas was to make it look and feel a little bit different than the traditional downtown. And, when you do for example, a lot of work in pedestrian areas and economic development, one of the things that gets people to go places where they haven't done before is this idea of curiosity. They feel safe, but they want to say, hey, what's over there? So someone's not going to walk into a dark alley, but they might walk into a well-lit alley, or they might follow a really cool art trail, or they might see a building peeking out from around the corner, and they want to see what's in it. And so one of the ways to begin to get people to explore this quarter is to really give it a little bit of a unique look and feel, but without forgetting that it is part of the downtown. So in terms of design, we have 5 sections. The first 2 sections are really making sure that the design is context appropriate. It remembers it's in downtown Prescott, which was the territorial capital of Arizona. And that's a big deal. And we don't want to forget about that. But we also want to be able to allow design and development to move forward. Another design component is making sure everything we build is walkable. And so that's a design component. And then we have guidelines for each of the 3 precincts. And what I'll say to you is the design guidelines look pretty similar, but they have little differences for each area. And when I talked with our designer, Kurt, about doing this, and I said, why are we repeating everything? He said, a lot of times if you're just going to build in one specific area, you're going to flip to the design guidelines for that area. You're not going to look at general. You're just going to have to say, what do I have to do in this area? And a lot of the stuff that's in common gets ignored. So when you read through these, you'll see a lot of repeat, but you'll also see some differences. And so I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up about that, which is why they're formatted that way. So I'll just walk through these somewhat quickly. And again, this is something you might deal with in zoning and rezoning cases, something the Historic Preservation Commission might deal with. But one of the things we want to make sure is that the design is context appropriate. And so these are some examples of the downtown. And, here are some real context considerations: the use of brick, making sure areas are shaded, that we have southwestern architectural details. We don't want a Cape Cod. We want to make sure that the colors are a desert palette and that we have colors that accent building details. And these are things you'll find throughout the historic downtown that are design elements or part of the architectural. So some of the short-term actions would be to use these principles. The next concept is walkable connections. And then the 3 principles under this design element are to make sure that the areas are compelling and active, to enrich the alleyways. Again, this is really one of our most important, we think, elements of this plan, and creating the paseos, another really important element. And the design section talks about what those could look like. So within each section, we have a what it could look like example. And this example shows what new development could look like. And we know it's very different than what you're used to seeing downtown. But with a lot of conversations with staff, we think that it's an opportunity for this quarter to really begin to create a different identity. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but what we do want to emphasize is the opportunity. What these images are for is really to show you how these design elements could be applied. So what you'll see is, for example, when you're creating a walkable connection, you want active ground floor uses like outdoor seating or dining. You want to put benches that are shaded on the walk areas, on the sidewalks, on these mid-block crossings, maybe adjacent to the above the creekside path. You want to make sure your parking areas are screened. This would be a parking garage, so that it doesn't really interrupt the pedestrian environment. And you want to make sure your ground floor is transparent. You can see, for example, window glazing, so that people don't, transparency is a huge component of walkable environments. It makes an area more active, even if there are displays in the windows or the windows are lit, it makes it feel safer. One of the other things is creating an active creek edge, and again, designing the character and making sure that all buildings that face the creek have an opportunity to have an active component. We talk about how to develop a creekside walk and what your creekside frontage should look like, creating outdoor gathering places. So for example, those new developments that might be at a mid-block crossing, but even if they're not, could have outdoor gathering places. This is from Twin Falls, Idaho. And their downtown actually is pretty similar to Prescott's, and it has it's a much bigger, it's a river that goes through their downtown, and their downtown is pretty much all on one side. But they took their creek and they activated it. They have ping pong tables and picnic tables. They have interactive art. And the day that we were there, again, it was during COVID, so a lot of stuff was closed. The downtown had people walking through it, but what was really interesting was to see the level of activity along the creek. And there were a lot of tourists, but there were also, you could see a lot of locals. And it was really kind of cool. So this is just an example of that. Using plantings, using signing as a way for people to find wayfinding. This is a utility box that they painted to just kind of talk about the downtown. So to remind people, hey, there's a creek here, but there's a downtown here. Screening some of those undesirable uses along the creek so that the creek stays a really nice environment. And then the other thing we talk about are ways to enrich alleyways. And these are all examples of alleyways. This is actually in Wyoming. It's a very historic downtown, and you have a similar example in your downtown, although it's inside off of Montezuma Street, that mall, the Whiskey Row Mall. That could be Whiskey Row Mall, except it doesn't have a cover. But creating those malls and those internal active alleyways can really begin to make the downtown more permeable and make the creek more connected to the downtown. We have a bunch of ways that you can do that. So here's an example of an alley. And, frankly, I could just literally envision tables along this alley and some cool plantings, and boom, you got an active alley. Have a fair in it. Have a food fest. Same thing with plantings. Again, you could see any of these alleys becoming one of the alleys we have in Prescott. There's nothing permanent in this alley, nothing. It's AstroTurf, some pallets that were turned into seating areas, and some painting on the wall. And then this talks to the Paseos for walkable connections and how those can happen, things that you can do in those walkable connections. Again, these are just examples of Paseos and things to do to highlight them. You could do lighting, you can do paving. So then when we hit the work precinct, we have specific principles, again, as I'd mentioned, for each precinct, and specific topologies that we look to be the dominant building type. So in the work precinct, you can see these 6 building typologies that we're looking at: employment, hotel lodging, food and beverage, mixed use, multi-story office, and live work. And like I said, these building topologies come through the entire quarter, but they look and feel a little bit different in each quarter area, and the emphasis on the topology is different in each of the areas in the quarter. We have 7 design principles pretty much for every district, but they're different, especially if you look towards the end. But a lot of them are somewhat similar. And then, again, we have a what it looks like. So for this site, this is an actual site. It's the site where, the old historic houses are on McCormick Street on the west side of the creek. This is the back of the houses. So here would be the houses, and here would be the back. And here would be the creek. And so you can really do some pretty cool stuff in your downtown, should you choose to do it. This fits on the site. And then if you look through, you can see how now we have a creek side orientation and an alley side orientation, because we create an alley behind those houses. Excuse me. There's some pocket plazas that we've created and cut through so that you can access the creek, desert color palette, and then use of brick. And, again, here's an example of a building here that isn't that far a cry from what this looks like. If this area kind of were set back, you'd have a pretty similar building with the cutouts for retail and a sidewalk. But this is the actual creek side, and I talked to the designer. This could actually exist within your downtown. There's enough room to do this. And again, here are some examples of those design principles applied. And then here would be the alley view of those design principles applied. And this is how do you accomplish each of those design principles. Again, this would be incorporated into the overlay district. We talk about placement and orientation of buildings, entries, scale, massing, creating the active frontages, creating coordinated design elements, how you could achieve visually compelling architectural design. This is pretty unique. This goes over the creek, but I don't think we envision that here. But just the idea of an articulated facade, a lot of glass, cool awnings. And then making sure you have good, safe parking and access. So you can just see how this entire parking garage is shaded. You can't even really tell, or the downtown parking areas are shaded so that it's hidden from view and it doesn't look like a garage. And creating compelling outdoor spaces. The play precinct, pretty much the same format. Here are our design principles. Here are the building topologies: retail, food and beverage, cultural and historic, mixed use, and townhomes. And you can see a lot of these ideas do increase the intensity and the density in the downtown. Here's an example of what a primarily retail building could look like in the Play District. We've had a lot of comments about this building. We know it's very different and we know it's very modern. But when you look around your downtown, you've already got some really cool modern elements that you don't see in historic buildings already. So it's not that big a step to say, hey, maybe we can just continue this kind of uniqueness in this area. And this building is just south of Gurley Street. And it faces the creek. I think this is the vacant old school building that's here. And then there's, I think, a bank parking lot and then a vacant site. Here's what this building would look like at ground level. You can see it's not that far cry from the American Warehouse, which you already have here at the Hilton Garden Hotel. So, this stuff is a little different looking, but it's not that different. And again, you can see how the design principles were applied. And again, it doesn't have to look like this, but you can build these structures. You can build new structures and apply these design principles. Here's an example of this very modern awning with the clear stories and the glazing at ground level, flat roof. And then again, more application of the design principles for the Play Precinct. The last precinct, this could actually be a really cool alley. I always like that picture for that. Again, these are not expensive improvements. And then, sorry? Oh, okay. And then the last precinct is Live, which is the precinct on the southern end of the district. Here are the building topologies. You can see these are much more slanted to residential, but they do include live, work, and mixed use, which would have retail on the bottom. Here's an example of what it could look like. This is your Hilton Garden Hotel that exists. Here's an example of an apartment complex that could be built, a multifamily complex that could be built in the downtown. And the site that we used for this is across the street, as I'd mentioned, from the existing Middle High field. And again, that fits on the site. Here's an example of a building that sort of mimics the archways. It's the Bolleri building that we're using on this design example. So it's not that far cry from what we've got downtown. You can see you can really build some pretty high-end stuff. You've got balconies and fenestration. Here's your shaded parking. You've got ground level retail, ground level entries, kind of scale and massing that meets kind of the existing development, creating frontages that are eye-catching. This could be on the alley side of the building. Coordinated design elements. I'm gonna keep on turning this off. And just interesting design. And then again, this idea of shaded parking areas. And then very cool outdoor spaces. So that is the design component of the plan. Keep going. All right, last section. This is short. Wayfinding. So our fifth big idea is people need to know about this area and they need to know how to move through it. And we've heard from everyone that that's a really important component. This section has some broad recommendations for wayfinding, but it doesn't have a very detailed wayfinding plan. It wasn't within our scope. But one of the things that wayfinding includes is not only signing, it includes online and hard copy items. So this just diagram shows you all of the components of wayfinding. We have in here a sign placement plan, the different kinds of signs that would be placed in different areas. And so what that talks to is this sign placement map, where these different signs would go. So we have taken the time to really think about what would go where within the downtown. We've thought a little bit about a color scheme that we think could work for a sign plan. And then we have a variety of concepts that we put forward. And this is the recommended concept. And so it's the family of signs with circles and squares and marker signs. And that is the plan.
All right, thank you. Questions from commission members? Do you want to just come back up here? Okay.
Otherwise, I'd have to give my name and address.
Tom Hutchison here.
Yes, Tom, go ahead.
I have a question for Leslie.
Go ahead.
Leslie, whether we like it or not, electric cars are in our future. And I wonder if this plan considers stations where electric cars can get charged.
You know, that's a great question. And I think that's sort of a two-sided answer. We could certainly include charging stations at the micromobility station, but I think that's probably something we should probably add into the parking garages consideration. It would just be something you'd want to include, or potentially in parking spaces have electric charging meters or spaces that charge, allow electric charging. I live in the Valley, and there's most of the parking garages there now have several charge stations for their electric cars. It's a great comment. Thank you.
Yeah. That electrification of vehicles is going to happen, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And it may be 3 to 5 years out, but now's the time to plan for that changeover.
Great comment. We'll add that in as we go forward.
Leslie, that's a lot of work. And it's also a lot to consume. If ever there was an example of boiling the ocean, this might be one of them. But as H. Ross Perot once said, the devil's in the details. So one of the things I would suggest is to as you go forward, to evaluate the potential unintended consequences. For example, years ago when I was on the Traffic and Safety Committee in Palos Verdes Estates, we evaluated these mid-street crosses, and that's a real issue because drivers are conditioned to stop at a stoplight. They're not so much conditioned to stop at a crosswalk in the middle of a street. You do make a good point that downtown the traffic is slow, but I'd like to see a little more development of that concern or discussion. The other is when I saw the photos of potential use of alleyways, I think that's a good idea, but I'd also consider other examples where what's been the impact on safety. Are they patrolled by city police? Because when you fill up an alleyway, every Wednesday morning I go downtown and have breakfast with my buddies. And I think it was last week, it's still 6:45 in the morning and it's dark and the city lights are on. And I noticed that somebody decapitated Frosty the Snowman and the Gingerbread Man. Those kind of things happen. So I think that is worthy of a consideration. Also, as you talked about your design criteria, you mentioned it should be Southwest and not Cape Cod. I'm not an architect or a designer, but when I go down Senator Highway, that looks a whole lot like Cape Cod. So that is part of Prescott's culture, and I think it's a good culture. When I think of Southwest, I think of like Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we're not Santa Fe and we're not Albuquerque. So those are considerations that I'd like to see as you proceed to develop them in a little more detail. So we address my concern of unintended consequences. With that, I thank you.
Thanks. Those are great comments.
Butch?
Yeah, Butch Tracy. This kind of vague. I mean, you've presented so much and done it very well, by the way. I really enjoyed it. Like on the corridor, the actual creek and so on, are the property owners bearing any of the cost of this, these renovations and these different things?
That's a great question. This would occur through redevelopment. So the property owners could bear some of the costs, but with Giplet, with that redevelopment area, with some of the incentive infill districts, some of those costs could be mitigated through abatement of property taxes, through reducing fees. But, the city isn't going to go to a property owner and say, you have to redevelop tomorrow. I mean, given a normal situation, not like life and safety. But what would happen is, let's say, and I saw one on, I think it's Goodwin in Montezuma Street. There's a new project in, I think I'm right, yeah? That property owner went ahead and redeveloped that site. So when he went to the planning department for permits and to change zoning and variances and whatever he needed, that project would ultimately come before you. But when the planning department reviewed it, they would take this plan out and say, hey, look, here are the things we're trying to accomplish. Can you try to accomplish these in your development as well? Make sure you have glazing. If you're on one of these alleyways, is there a way we can make that a really cool paseo? Is there something more we can do? So it would occur through the development process. It wouldn't be as of this date, you have to do that. And so I just want to take that one question you're going to really regret asking, to get on my soapbox a little bit. This is a long-term plan, really long-term. And I was just talking with Tyler about it. Gilbert, which many of you know what downtown Gilbert looks like, and I'm certainly not saying this should be downtown Gilbert, but 20 years ago, downtown Gilbert looked nothing like what it was now. I know what downtown Gilbert looked like 20, 25 years ago, but they stayed the course. And they adjusted over time, they changed their mind. But if you look at that downtown now, the canal is a vital part of their downtown. It's their river. The Water Tower Park is a fabulous park that's used for art events. It's a real community gathering place. They have incredibly high-end restaurants in the downtown. They have outdoor and street-side dining. They've narrowed the street. They have a parking garage. They have new residential that's pouring in around the downtown. Property values have increased. The money into the city has been well worth the work. And that town still maintains its identity. And in fact, now the downtown is becoming very much part of their downtown. So I'm sorry, downtown Chandler, not Gilbert, my bad. Downtown Gilbert is also revitalizing. And so no dissing downtown Gilbert. You'll see many of those same things happening. So this is a long-term effort. It's not an overnight effort.
That's all I have.
Thank you for your question.
Leslie, was there an opportunity to get the feeling of the current property owners and businesses in this area on what their thoughts concerning this plan?
Yes. Many of the property owners and businesses were on the steering committee. And in addition, day before yesterday, we had a meeting. It was attended by five property owners and businesses to review the plan. And their one question is, how long is it going to take? But there really wasn't any substantial, I have concerns about kind of comments. Most of them were pretty supportive of it.
Okay. Any questions from the audience?
Leslie, Tom Hutchison again.
Hi.
Could you please quantify long-term plan? Put some numbers on that for us.
Well, I don't think that some of this stuff, like some of the major improvements and some of the redevelopment we're envisioning, would probably happen within the next 3 to 5 years. But I do think a lot of the things could happen within the next 3 to 5 years. In particular, some of the temporary enhancements, designating the alley, approving a redevelopment area, putting in place all the pieces for redevelopment to occur. We see that as an opportunity within the short term. And then once those pieces are in place, you've got your website up, maybe you start to form your business improvement district. That's a little bit of a longer process probably. So maybe within 5 years, you really start seeing things changing. And I think a good example is, I think there's some redevelopment occurring now in the downtown, a hotel that's looking to redevelop. That's a first start. So as these things begin to start, they start slow, and then they really, you reach what's called takeoff, and the downtown really begins to change. So I look at downtown Prescott and I remember downtown Prescott 25 years ago, and I look at downtown Prescott 15 years ago, and it was substantially different then. And now I look at downtown Prescott and what it is now. It's a way different place than it was 10 years ago. So some of this stuff is incremental. It's as fast as you want to move. But I do think that within the next, 1 to 3 years, if the city really focuses on getting in place the pieces that will help redevelopment and development and some of this improvement occur, then that can begin to start within the next 3 to 5 years, the physical stuff.
So do you see a couple key next steps that catalyzes this development? Are there a couple things that the city can do?
Yes. Yes.
What would those key next steps be?
Commissioner Montoya, I think the biggest step would be a group of actions on the part of the city, again, with the support of this commission and the support of the council, would be one, designating that alley as a shared street and beginning to take actions to really activate that alley. I think that's an important piece. I think some of the short-term design solutions, temporary design, especially in the alley, but maybe beginning to paint the street from some mid-block crossings. I know Commissioner Gambogi has some concerns about those, but I think there's some opportunities in lower traffic areas. I think some signing would be really helpful, even if it's temporary signing. I think very importantly, designation of the redevelopment area would be a very important first step, and designation of the central business district, because that immediately gives the city a very powerful tool to encourage redevelopment. So some of those, and then the last thing is I would encourage the property owners to seriously discuss forming a business improvement district. Those things, you own property here. You own a business here. Those people know what this area needs better than anyone else. They are live it, eat it, and breathe it. And they should really have power to be able to do some of the things that a city might not be able to do as quickly or in the same manner as a city. And so I think that business improvement district would be a tremendous first step as well.
Thank you.
You have another?
Yeah, I have another question. Sorry, it's Butch Tracy. My concern is, in a floodway, it's very little that you can do. I mean, in so many times, you can't even build a fence, or you can't, a sidewalk. Is this something that, because it's municipality and it goes through this, that there's some different rules in that? And maybe Tyler could answer that, but does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes, it does. It makes sense. And I would say, again, since I'm not the engineer, public works guy, but having interacted with them on this, just because it's a city-approved plan, it wouldn't deny anything that we'd have to do from FEMA standards or other things. And we put some resources in this plan that point owners, property owners, business owners, building owners who want to redevelop or do different things. There are certain things that the federal government would allow. There's ways around certain regulations depending on the use of the building, the historic nature of the building. And Public Works has been very helpful with one-on-one. I've sat with them in a room with, it's actually the owners of the old school district building who want to redevelop that. And we've sat with them and said, this is what you can do. And here's some things that, unless you read this 400-page manual, you might not catch. But since our guys have been doing it for so long, they'll highlight things that could help them. So this doesn't get us out of the problems that floodplains bring, but it can certainly help. And we have resources on staff to help point people in the right direction.
Okay, well, I was just concerned with that. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope it can all be done, and I think it's a wonderful idea. It's just that
There'll still be challenges.
It's always been a stumbling block. Anytime we've tried to work in anything that was flood zone, especially, there's just zero, So anyway, that was, thank you.
And I'm just going to add one more thing, Commissioner Tracy, is that when we did this plan, we also looked at other downtowns across the Southwest that had water features in them. And a lot of these practices were pulled from those downtowns. So, we didn't look at like, a mountaintop downtown that had, rainwater to deal with that always flowed off the downtown. We looked at downtowns that were next to rivers and next to creeks and had to deal with flooding. So Prescott is a little bit unique with that, but city engineers reviewed this plan and he hasn't really called out any of this as undoable.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Leslie, I want to thank you and your team for the time and effort you put on it and the expertise that you have brought to this and given us some options to look at and plans for the future, hopefully. And Tyler, I want to thank you for being the liaison with the city and the time and effort you put in on this too. So,
Thank you. It's really been an honor to work with you on this. And you will see us back again with Prescott North. But I have to tell you, our whole team is, the only word I can use is jazzed. They're really excited about the opportunities downtown, and they're all really, fell back in love, if they weren't in love in the first place, with the downtown. It's a really tremendous opportunity for the city. So thank you for allowing us to be part of that.
no problem at all there. Red.
Mr. Chair, we have another agenda item, as you all know. Is there an inclination to take a break in between these two segments? Why don't we do that?
Why don't we take a 10-minute break, back 22?
Okay.
Ahead and resume our meeting now. Bren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bryn Stotler, Director of Community Development. Well, we've had a great first half of our meeting with presentation of the Granite Creek Area Plan, and it's really fun to take a forward look at planning and kind of touch on all of the opportunities that we have in the future for the planning of that corridor. But now we're going to move into code. We are always looking at our code. Our land development code guides our planning and zoning activities, and throughout the year, planning staff notes different areas of land use law that may be changing, updating, and certain parts of our code may have either become obsolete or not easy to apply. And so we like to look at opportunities for land development code amendments. And of course, when we start talking about those amendments, we like to start with our Planning and Zoning Commission. So here we are. Let's go ahead and get started. Oops. Why is it not? Oh, there, it was catching up, sorry. We always have to have a little technical glitch right when we start, just to get it out of the way. So this slide is full of words, and I'm going to move on to a visual shortly, but we're going to start with some basics today. Just planning and zoning terminology, and we're going to talk mostly zoning. What is zoning? What types of zoning exist? What opportunities do we have within our zoning code? And what it takes to change our zoning code. Oh. Tom Hutchison, are you still with us? Could you unmute and just confirm that you're still connected?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Wonderful. We were just reconfirming quorum after the break. Thank you. That was Planning Manager George Worley helping us out here with meeting management. All right, continuing on with our terminology. I'm going to throw up this visual because this sort of depicts visually what our zoning code looks like. The most common types of zoning are Euclidean, conventional, and performance. We're going to start with what our zoning is, which is, funny word, Euclidean, but it's also called cumulative zoning. So what it means is you start with a base residential zone. As zoning intensities are increased, all lesser uses are also allowed in the next zone higher. So in this exhibit, we see that we have single-family residential only zoning, where if you want to do something different than a single-family residence, you have to come and ask to rezone the property to incorporate additional uses. We have multifamily zoning. You can build multifamily and multifamily zoning, but you can also build single-family residential. We have some transition zones that work us into commercial. We like to kind of group those together and call it neighborhood commercial. But basically, these are neighborhood services that would be complementary to residential uses. Nothing too intense, not a grocery store, not a convenience store, not something that's high traffic. Neighborhood commercial uses can be small offices, individual owners that have home-based businesses are incorporated into those uses and districts. And then we work more towards our general commercial districts, which we have, as you know, business general and business regional. These zoning districts obviously expand largely to incorporate all of our commercial uses up, through grocery stores, auto dealerships, shopping malls, that type of thing. So in addition to those uses, all the lesser uses are allowed. That sometimes becomes a subjective issue when it comes to the use of property. But the zoning code in our community has been in existence for over 50 years. It has been cumulative zoning throughout that time. And actually, I think our community has developed really, really beautifully. Another type of zoning, conventional, means that the districts don't have a cumulative or pyramidal component. In other words, commercial zoning does not allow residential uses. Residential zoning does not allow commercial uses. And you can have the same three subtypes that exist in Euclidean zoning, which I didn't mention earlier, but prohibitive, which, let me go to this, oops, sorry, go back a bit. Prohibitive, meaning that districts have specific lists of uses that are prohibited, and any use not listed is not, all uses not listed are permitted. Permissive, where districts have a list of uses that are permitted and all uses not listed are prohibited. A little bit of a converse situation there. And then blended, which is permissive, but with a mechanism to allow unspecified uses based upon their similarity with specified uses. And that's what we have. We have a combination of the two. And basically, a real-time example of that would be requiring a special use permit for a certain use that is not specifically allowed in the zoning. So again, getting back to the conventional, this visual shows you how that zoning, basically the districts coexist with one another. There is no crossover of uses. Commercial stays in commercial, multifamily is in multifamily, and single-family residential is only found in that zoning district. Performance-based zoning is a little bit different. You may have heard of something called form-based codes. That is a subtype of this type of zoning. And here's sort of a visual representation of that. Form-based zoning talks more and considers more the relationship of buildings to one another. It doesn't focus as much on uses. It focuses more on the visual aspects of zoning. And you find it most in downtown areas where they're looking for a certain feel to the downtown. Flagstaff actually uses some form-based code in its downtown area. So with zoning, which is a legal vested right, comes some legal limitations. And you may have heard of Prop 207. It relates specifically to land use and private property rights. And George Worley is going to come up and talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Bryn. We talk about this fairly often when we bring things before you. There are limitations on what cities can and can't do when we change zoning, either the zoning designation or the zoning codes. Either of those actions could trigger a consideration under Arizona's law called diminution of value, which is often referred to as Prop 207. It's unfortunate that we often refer to things by prop numbers because they get reused. So there's also a Prop 207 that legalizes marijuana, but we won't go there with this discussion. What we're going to talk about basically is the consideration that when we bring things before you that may be a rezoning of property, the consideration of that property's value and the property owner's value of the land is always part of the discussion. The property owner is normally the catalyst for the rezoning that we would bring to you, but when we change zoning code provisions, it's the city that's usually the catalyst for those changes. And when a property owner brings something to you, generally a Prop 207 issue is not part of it because they're the ones promoting the change to the zoning. When we bring you something, it very well could be an impact on the value of property of a particular property owner. So that conversation will occur with any proposed changes as we bring them forward to you. So today we're talking about generalizations, but we may have specific discussions of each of these as we bring ideas to you for modifications to our zoning code in the future. And if you have any questions about Prop 207, we have an attorney here. One of the other things that we've done is, as Bren mentioned earlier, is look at particular sections of the code, and the remainder of the presentation today will step through a series of changes to, possible changes to codes. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Certainly.
If we had some, and there's been a number of cases that have come before us where someone wants to rezone to be able to do something. But I've noticed in at least a couple of those cases where zoning may be on a road that you'd say, well, how could you possibly ever have an SF-35 type house built on that space? Is that impacted by 207? I mean, if we said, look, nobody's going to build a $3 million house there. Why don't we rezone it from SF-35 to something smaller?
If we were to initiate that zoning from the city side and say, we're going to rezone your property, then that proposition comes into play. We're going to have a conversation with the property owners who are affected by the rezoning and assure that they don't see a diminution of value, that they don't perceive it as reducing the value of their property. It can go either way. Sometimes going from a multifamily or commercial zoning to single family can make a property more valuable if it's not conducive to the type of development that the current zoning covers. In this particular case, we're more concerned about us imposing a land use change on them. That's what the Arizona law prohibits. It's intended to protect property owners from government, so that we don't make a change to them that impacts them without us compensating for that change.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on from more generalized conversations to more specifics, we have a series of things that we're going to talk to you about that are existing in the Land Development Code, have been functioning in the Land Development Code, but could be made better. And in one case, there's some confusion about what it actually says, and we'll talk about that as well. We very often bring projects to you that have outside lighting and associated lighting with them. Our current code doesn't specifically allow for or call out the types of LED, light-emitting diode lighting. It is the most common lighting source that we see in exterior lighting today on commercial projects or on any larger residential projects. And LED lighting has a specific way it's measured because you can vary the color and brightness spectrum of the lighting by the type of, it's called a temperature range. Light is measured in a temperature range. We have provisions in our code that talk about different types of lighting, but they're more traditional lighting. Incandescent light bulbs, low or high pressure sodium lighting that are slowly being edged out of the market by the much more efficient LED lighting. One of the things that we don't have specifically laid out in our code is that range. Yellow light is considered low end of the spectrum, and very white light is considered the very high end of the spectrum. You'll see below the picture the color spectrum. Generally speaking, our light has traditionally been created by devices that are at the low end, the warm white end as they're designated on the drawing there. And those spectrum that spectrum of light's more yellowish. It's more like sunlight. It's more compatible with situations that we often run into where commercial developments using these lights as exterior lighting are near enough or visible to residential neighborhoods, and it's more compatible to those neighborhoods. It's also more compatible to the dark sky requirements that we often impose on folks. You have certainly heard us come before you and say that this is dark sky compliant. Fixtures have a certain type of cover to keep the light from just going in all directions, but the light color spectrum makes a big difference too. We're intending on bringing to you a modification to our code that will specify this in detail, very similar, and probably will use that diagram as part of that proposal in order to address the light spectrum that we allow under certain circumstances. We have a couple of circumstances where the yellow end is not necessarily the limitation. Car dealerships are allowed to have very white lights. It would be more in the 42 to 45K range, the middle of that chart. Those types of things would be allowed but modified through this process so that we have something that clearly defines what we're talking about with light spectrum. And again, LEDs are the wave of the future. That is how everything will be lighted in the future. Do you have any questions about that, or shall we move on and talk about something else?
Curiosity question, George.
Certainly.
We're dark sky. We want downward there. When we talk about that, that means that should be shielded so the light just goes down, not that the light bulb hangs down.
Correct.
Okay.
So our intention with that is to maintain the light on the property being lighted by those fixtures. Not necessarily a focused beam, but maintain it on so that it doesn't spill out into the street or spill over into another property.
Now, there are properties out there that were existing prior to this coming into effect. If someone who has the old style and they're going to replace it, say it goes bad or whatever, do they have to have the downward, or can they replace it with what they had before?
If they replace the fixture, the actual physical thing that contains the light bulb, they have to comply with the new dark sky requirements. There are LED light bulbs of various types, depending on the type of fixtures, that can be swapped out without changing the physical fixture, and those can be done without bringing it up to code. So if you have an old style fixture and you take out the incandescent bulb and you put an LED bulb in and there's no physical change to the fixture, it can stay the way it is. It's considered a legal non-conforming under our lighting code.
Thank you.
George, are the LEDs easier to contain, that light?
They can be very well focused depending on the type of fixture. So yes, they can be designed so that you don't need a mechanical shield to keep the light on the site, as opposed to an incandescent bulb, which generally produces light in all directions. These can be focused in certain areas. So yes, they're often better for that purpose, as well as being far more energy efficient. And that's why they're the wave of the future.
Thank you.
Oh, there you are.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the Commission. Tammy DeWitt, Community Planner. So we're going to go through some other code proposals. So some of the things that we've seen, some people buy larger pieces of property with the intent of wanting to put more structures on the property. That's why they're buying a 1 acre or larger, either for farm animals or to have the big workshop and such that you can have in the outlying areas of the county. In the county, they focus on lot coverage. So you could have in the county a 500 square foot house and a 5,000 square foot workshop / garage, if you wanted to, on your property. Within the city of Prescott, we have codes that regulate where the intent is that your primary structure, your house, which is mostly what we're focusing on, is residential properties or residential developed properties, is that your house is the primary structure on the property, and then you have accessory structures. And we have regulations in our code about how many accessory buildings you can have. You can have 3 on a property, but then we also have a square footage allowance, which in our code right now is either 600 square feet or 50% of your primary's livable area. And we also look at accessory structures, it's the total gross floor area. So when we look at this, which is our next slide, we're going to look at the definitions. Garages don't count towards that square footage. Only accessory buildings, such as a detached guest house or a shed or anything for storage or a workshop. So what we're proposing to do, and this is something we've seen a lot with the larger areas on the outskirts of Prescott, is that to change our code for the SF35 and then the RE2 zoning for these larger parcels that are 1 acre or more, to not look at the square footage allowance, but just focus more on the lot coverage allowance. So someone could have the additional accessory structures, such as a barn for their farm animals, their workshop, a garage, a guest house, on the property for 1 acre or larger lots is what we're focusing on. So that basically with a lot of those, it's only like a 20 or 30% lot coverage allowance. So it is still that they're maintaining the open space of those parcels, but we're allowing them to put some more additional structures that a lot of people are buying these parcels are expecting to be able to do, like the workshop or a barn or, a guest house and all that. So this is something we're looking at. This is a trend that we've been seeing a lot over the last few years since I've been here, of people wanting to have those larger structures, accessory structures on their properties. And this is something that we are proposing to just look at lot coverage instead of the square footage allowance.
Do we have a lot of property that's an acre or more in the city limits already?
Yes, we do. So this would, there are a lot of the older neighborhoods, not much with the mass production lots that we're seeing now, but with the older areas or lot split areas, yes, we do see these questions come up of people wanting to do more structures on the property.
Okay.
So are there any questions in regards to this slide? We'll bring more information forward, but like more examples and such as we move forward with this one.
I got a question. I think you said we kind of exempt garages, but other things are like barns and workshops, correct?
Correct. So this will be a great segment to the next slide. So we have what's called a gross floor area definition. So this is a very confusing definition to try to explain to people, because we do have in our code the allowance for detached accessory buildings of 600 square foot or 50% of the primary's gross floor area. Per this definition, the gross floor area for detached accessory structures excludes areas used for parking vehicles. So garages or areas that we park vehicles or a carport does not count towards that gross floor area definition at this time.
Okay, here's my two questions. Can you build a garage that puts in 13 vehicles with no restrictions?
Yes.
Can you build a garage that houses 4 vehicles, except you only put one in and the rest of it is a workshop?
Yes. But we have size limitations, because for that one, we're going to want a floor plan that says this is going to be used for the workshop and this area is going to be used for parking the vehicle. The area that's used for parking the vehicle is not included in the total gross floor area allowed for detached accessory buildings. That's why this gets very confusing for staff trying to explain it to the public. So the intent is to take away the part of the definition of gross floor area to say where it will include garages and carports for parking areas. So it's easier math and it's easier to define for the public. The intent is that accessory buildings are accessory to your primaries, at least on the regular size lots, except if we do the other one for the accessory buildings, that we won't look at the square footage. It'll just be lot coverage allowance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Council member?
I have a question. This is a real interesting conversation. I live on 1 acre plus lot in a 1 acre plus community. And my first question is, if you're in an HOA, does this supersede the HOA rules or not?
No.
Okay. And then my next question is, view shed. Say, you have a nice view of the mountains or something, and your neighbor wants to build a accessory structure, say a casita, guest house. Residentially, will he be able to do the full 2 stories, 27 feet, or will there be a restriction to have it just 1 story so it's less obstructive to the neighbors?
Detached accessory buildings have a height restriction of 20 feet, maximum height from existing grade to the highest point.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We're not proposing
Want to change that? Yeah, that's not something to be changed.
There was a mention about barns being allowed in here. By doing that, does that have any effect upon the types of animals you're allowed to have within the city limits and how many?
No, that's a separate code under the city code. So we aren't proposing anything for that. So you still have the size restrictions and such. Basically what this is going to do is take away in this definition. So that's all we're looking at is this definition to take out where it excludes garages and parking areas for vehicles as part of that detached accessory square footage allowance. So now those garages will now be part of that. So you're only allowed 600 square feet or 50% of your primary livable area. So if you have a 5,000 square foot house, then you can have 2,500 square feet of detached accessory structures. As long as you don't exceed the lot coverage allowance, that still comes into play. I mean, there's still other criteria, setbacks, lot coverage allowance that still come in play, but they're going to be able to have more structures on their property or more square footage of structures on their property.
Okay.
Or actually less, because a garage will now count towards that.
Excuse me, what is the lot coverage? What is there a percentage of it? What is that?
So it depends on the zoning. So that ranges for residential between an RE2, you're allowed 20% lot coverage with structures, but then like an SF9 where you can have down to 9,000 square foot lot size, you can cover 40% of your property with structures. So there's still a lot of buffering and open space on the properties where it's just not 100% structures.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What we're hoping to do is help clarify what the square footage allowances for detached accessory structures to include garages in that. Right now, they're excluded. So when we start looking at calculating square footages for the accessory structures, it becomes very confusing to try to explain that. Well, if it's a garage, that doesn't count towards that. But you still are limited to 3 accessory structures and your lot coverage allowance. But this will add the garages to be included in that. So we don't have to still limit the number and square footage of your accessory structures. Hopefully that made sense. It's a confusing one. So the next one we're looking at, so in our code, we do allow accessory dwelling units or guest houses in any residential zoning district. They can be attached or detached. The thing with accessory dwelling units, they are for non-paying, non-reimbursing guests. They could be somebody living there year-round. A lot of time we see with the boomerang generation, the kids coming back, living at home, or parents moving in with their kids. We're seeing a lot of that. But as we're doing a lot of research and seeing what's going on throughout the country to deal with the housing issues we have, is that a lot of areas are allowing them to rent out those accessory dwelling units. So we do kind of look at them as a duplex type scenario, but the idea is to allow these to be rented to help with some of our housing rental shortages that we have in the areas. And we're seeing this in a lot of areas. I know Sedona was creating certain areas to allow for these to be rented out separately. I think Flagstaff was also looking at it to help with their housing issues. A lot of it is where you have a lot of tourism areas or tourism-based areas, and the people that work there can't afford to live there and they're commuting or such. So this is a way to create another option for affordable housing in our community, is for people to be, and actually probably rental income for people to be able to rent out their accessory dwelling units or guest houses instead of just having it for non-paying guests.
So the concept is you could rent out your whole house, so why shouldn't you be able to rent out part of your house?
You're correct.
Okay.
And also, right now the guest houses can be used as short-term rentals separately. So that's something the state, overrode us on. So right now they can be rented out, but for less than 30 days. But to do it for long-term rentals, we would have to amend our code to allow for that. So that was that one. Are there any questions or thoughts about that? I know Kaylee has done a lot of research for some of her classes, and she had a lot more information. Unfortunately, she's sick today, so.
Something you said as long as it's not rented out for 30 days,
So,
or more than 30 days, rather. So like in Airbnb, is that the limit that it can be rented out for?
yes, short-term rentals are less than 30 days. So but what we are seeing, if Banner Hospital gets built, that a lot of things that you see is a lot of traveling nurses or traveling people that are looking for places for a few months at a time or for longer. And this allows options, or for, we have a lot of retired community here, to have someone living in their place to help them take care of their property or to watch the property while they're traveling. It gives people a lot more options.
Thank you.
The state's preemption of our local code that allows for mandates that we allow for short-term rental doesn't provide additional housing. Short-term rental isn't additional housing. So we're already seeing that some of these things are being used for that short-term rental purpose, but they're not accomplishing the additional housing that could benefit the city, could benefit those folks who currently can't live in the city and therefore commute on our streets and fill up our highways, by allowing them to live in town. And it's kind of difficult, similar to the discussion of having a definition of gross floor area that nets things out, which it's no longer a gross floor area. We have the same situation here. We have to explain to property owners that they can short-term rent a piece of their property, a unit on their property or something, but they can't rent it long-term, which may be more stable for them and provide housing. So it is something we really need to talk more about, and we will have a lot more information for you when we come back with it.
Well, thank you.
And currently, you can have somebody live in it year-round, just that you're not supposed to be getting any income, and that's really hard to enforce. They could say they're a cousin, and how do we know that they're getting income from them? We wouldn't know. So it's already something we're kind of seeing out there, but we want to codify it to make it where it's not an issue, an enforcement issue, or potentially be an enforcement issue. Okay, and now we're turning over back to George.
Thank you. So one of the things that we do periodically is look at the way various codes are enforced. Our Board of Adjustment handles particular types of code aspects. In this particular case, a conditional use permit goes to the Board of Adjustment. They do a review of it. They look at whether or not a particular use requires conditions. Tattoo parlors and pawn shops are listed in our code as requiring a conditional use permit. They are restricted to commercial zoning districts, primarily our heavier commercial districts, downtown business, business general, and business regional. But they require the additional review by Board of Adjustment for conditions to be applied to it. We're simply not seeing conditions being applied to them because the operational aspects of those two types of businesses have become more and more in line with traditional businesses that we see everywhere else. Any retail store is going to be open longer than a tattoo parlor. Tattoo parlors don't take walk-in traffic any longer for the most part. They're almost always a by appointment only type of operation. The requirement to send them through a conditional use review and not placing conditions on them because they are almost inherently compatible with other types of businesses has been an issue that has our Board of Adjustment even asking, why do we see these things? So that's something we want to bring back to you for discussion on whether or not additional requirements such as the conditional use permit review is necessary for these types of businesses. Are they substantially different? Should they be treated differently than other types of retail uses that may or may not already have the same types of impact on adjacent businesses or adjacent residences? So that's something that we've seen a lot of recently where conditions aren't being applied and maybe the process needs to be looked at. Do we even need to go through a conditional use permit review? We'll bring it back to you with more details, talk about it, and obviously we're going to want to get your input on it before we take anything forward. Sir?
What was the original reason for putting the conditional use permit on tattoo parlors and pawn shops?
Some of it was societal perception of those businesses, which has changed considerably over the years. Tattoo shops have always been looked at as something that was not mainstream.
Right.
They've become very mainstream today. The same with pawn shops. Pawn shops are heavily regulated by the state, so they don't need to be as regulated by the local government. Pawn shops generally aren't open till 3 a.m, then having lights and traffic that would impact adjacent properties, specifically adjacent residential properties. The same with tattoo parlors. They're no longer open in the middle of the night. They're very often family-owned and operated businesses, and with the appointment-only aspect that we see, they very rarely have an impact on nearby businesses or properties greater than any type of retail store.
So the original reason for imposing a conditional use permit may have related more to the clientele than the business itself.
It certainly may have. That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just have a few questions. BG zoning, if you take away the conditional use permit, BG zoning, we have a lot of BG zoning that backs up against residential neighborhoods. So if you take away the conditional use permit, that means those places can go in a neighborhood without any input from the neighbors. They would just be unaware until the sign was put out, right?
That would be correct. So
Yeah.
they are considered permitted uses already. The conditional aspect is to look at conditions that may be applied to them, such as time of operation, exterior lighting. Conditional uses aren't just for tattoo parlors. They affect types of things that can spill over into adjacent properties.
Yeah. So theoretically, we have the Petroglyph Point controversial topic going on, and that's BG zoning. It's in a master plan community. It's in a platted senior campus. So theoretically, if you take away the conditional use permit requirement, then a tattoo parlor and a pawn shop could go in there without any input from the neighbors until it's already up and running.
Correct. Under the conditional use process, input from the neighbors would be limited to concerns about those things that can be conditions. So it will never be a yes or no question of whether you can do it. The question would be, are you limited by hours? Are you limited by lighting? Are you required to put additional screening on the property? Those types of things. So it's not a yes or no for conditional use. It's only conditions.
It would be approved administratively without public input.
It would be
without council and planning and zoning.
The conditional use permit goes to the Board of Adjustment. It doesn't go to council, and it wouldn't go to the Planning
I'm sorry. I was
Commission.
thinking of the
It's
special
only the Board
use
of Adjustment.
permit.
But if the Board of Adjustment were to review it and say there's no additional conditions required, yes, it's approved as is.
And what about vape shops? They kind of go hand in hand with tattoo parlors and pawn shops in my mind. Are they going to be part of this too?
I don't think we've actually looked at that.
Well, yeah, I would consider that. That's vape shops. Because with our rehab industry here, there seems to have been as a long-term resident, I've seen a prolification of, if that's a word, of tattoo parlors and vape shops. And I'm sorry, I know maybe I'm just being an old church lady. It's something that I really don't support. And then when you say they're just kind of a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday business, that's not true, because I've been to events at tattoo parlors after hours where they'll have a band and have some get-togethers, which is okay. But, you know, if it's in a neighborhood, you know, that might not be true, that they're just 9 to 5 business hours.
The general operating hours are 9 to 5. Events after hours for business type, I mean, that's certainly would occur.
Yeah, but anyway, I just wanted to ask those questions. We might want to look into vape shops, because to me, you know, as a retired healthcare professional, vape shops are very detrimental to the health of the vapors. And actually, just throw this in, tattoos, if you get enough of them, it's a foreign body, the ink, and it causes an autoimmune reaction that interferes with people's immune systems and can cause cancer. So to proliferate these things, I'm just not on board with giving up more regulation, you know, having less regulation on. But that's just my opinion.
Understood. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? I will
Go ahead.
move on to sign codes. So we adopted some variation to the sign code about 4 years or 5 years ago in the land development code that changed how we measure signs. One of the things that we've seen that we didn't account for at the time we updated it was that in some cases it may be appropriate to give businesses a minimum sign area. Most of our sign design criteria today are based on either the speed limit of the street, the posted speed limit of the street in front for freestanding signs, or the distance of the building away from the sidewalk for building attached signs. And there's logic to both of those. The faster the speed limit, the larger the freestanding sign needs to be so that a driver can make a decision to turn at a particular location further away, so you need a larger sign. And the further a building is away from the sidewalk or the front of the property, the harder the sign is to read, so you allow larger signage. In some cases, though, very close zero frontage, particularly in the downtown, where our businesses, generally the front of the business is the front of the property, have zero setback from the street and ultimately end up with very small sign allowances. And the question we're going to bring to you is, should we create a minimum size sign? Regardless of the size of your business, you at least get this size sign. That way it's not just directly based on distance away from the street, it's based on a minimum sign, and then distance away from the street can get you larger square footage. So it's sort of a safety net for small businesses and small spaces with zero frontage, which is pretty much the definition of businesses in our downtown, to make sure that they have sufficient signage that can be visible to pedestrians perhaps a little further away than simply standing right in front of the building. So if you picture signage on a traditional commercial lot, the building is almost never right at the front of the property. There's a parking lot between the sidewalk and the business, and there is a good, clean example of how you measure and enlarge the sign based on that distance. But downtown, we don't have that. If you're on the sidewalk, there's very small areas that are permitted for signage.
Do we have a rough idea of what we're thinking about for a minimum size?
I do. I don't have an example for you, though.
What are they allowed right now with zero? You know, if they're sitting right on the street, what's their sign?
It's based on the width of the unit, and it's a half a square foot per foot of unit. So in some cases, it could be 6 square feet or 4 square feet. It can be a very small sign. We may want to establish, say, 10 square feet as a minimum or 15 square feet as a minimum to allow for some uniformity of signage. One of the other issues we see downtown is the width of units varies significantly. Many of them are only 15 feet wide. So you have very small space. And in those cases, the minimum sign could be as small as 5 or 6 feet.
So if we have a minimum, does that mean everybody has to have at least that size?
This would allow for a minimum size at the property owner's discretion. We're not going to tell them how small the sign can be. We're going to tell them what the maximum size is, but we would give them an automatic size that they could meet. So if someone chose to have a smaller sign or no sign, they could do that. But if they choose a sign, they can say, I want that minimum instead of the 5 square feet that I get otherwise. So again, an option to consider so that we have some uniformity of sign size, and it's a fairness issue.
Is there a difference in whether or not it's like a neon sign or it's a lit up sign? It's just simply the square footage? That's what they're allowed.
The way we measure varies. So if you look at some of the examples in the picture, the one that says zigzag professional hair design, that's a neon type sign. It's probably not neon. It's probably LED.
Right.
But if you measure around each of the words, because it has individual words, the measurement of the sign is based on that. If you look at the one that says Dextra directly above it, we would measure the entire background of that one because it doesn't have the individual letters and words.
Thanks.
So the least controversial of all of our discussions today will be about removing all requirements for parking from all businesses in the downtown business district. One of the things that we did when we adopted the land development code and created the downtown business district was exempt certain types of businesses from requiring on-site parking and allow them to simply use the on-street parking, which is available in the downtown. That was done for a very particular reason. First, most of the businesses in the downtown fell into the category that were exempted, and those are hospitality-related businesses. And under the definition in the Land Development Code, that includes restaurants, most retail spaces that serve tourism-based type of operations, hotel uses, etc. Some of those businesses will naturally want parking and create parking when they're built. For instance, the Hilton Garden Inn is a good example in the downtown. Hotels generally want parking on site or very close. The Hacienda Hotel, for instance, has an entire parking lot across the street that they acquired for parking so that they had extra parking. They had guaranteed parking rather than rely on street parking. Other types of businesses and residential uses in the code still require parking. So a lawyer's office in the downtown would require on-site parking of a sufficient amount. A retail donut shop or a bakery next door to them would not. So we have this strange split where some businesses require them and some don't, all within the downtown. The original reason for not requiring the on-site parking was to discourage the destruction of historic buildings to create parking lots. If you require businesses to have on-site parking, they're going to acquire larger pieces of property, and our downtown is chock full of historic buildings that we don't want to knock down just to provide parking spaces. And that was one of the reasons why this was pushed through. And again, taking into account the majority of businesses are exempted, we're wondering, is it really necessary to require on-site parking? We allow it, but we don't require it for the other types of businesses that we currently do. Should a lawyer's office be required to create a parking lot either in front or behind the business? Yes, sir.
With the plan we just heard proposed, and I think we've looked at it in the past too, we have a lot of buildings downtown. You have the retail on the ground floor. The upper floor is really not utilized, but trying to get that into residential.
We want it to be residential.
Have required parking for residential on that. So that wouldn't affect the residential aspect. They would have to have, if we're going to have a condo unit or apartment unit up there and it has X number of bedrooms, we will have X number of designated parking spaces for them.
On site. So under current rules, we would exempt the retail business on the ground floor from on-site parking and require the residential above it to have parking. if we're trying to encourage businesses on the ground floor and residential above in the downtown, which our general plan does, and the Land Development Code's downtown business district does, why are we requiring the on-site parking? There's street parking available, there's the parking garage available, there's the option for additional parking garages. We heard from Leslie in her presentation. Are we giving a mixed message when we say we want retail on the ground floor and we want to exempt you from parking so that we don't tear down historic buildings to provide parking spaces? And then if you put residential above it, we're going to make you tear down historic buildings and put parking spaces in. So this would treat every use in the downtown business district exactly the same. No one's required to have parking on site. Can if you want, but we don't want to provide an incentive to destroy historic buildings.
So like when we had looked at in the past on a corner of Montezuma and Goodwin, potential condominiums, and we were requiring them to have parking for those based upon the number of units, bedrooms, and all that, we would no longer make that a requirement?
It wouldn't be a requirement for on-site parking.
Okay.
They may have to demonstrate available parking for certain types of uses. That's certainly a possibility. And it's also a possibility that conditioning that demonstration of uses could be part of an approval process for those businesses. We want to know that there is sufficient use for someone who's going to put, a 4-story building full of apartments and have no street parking available for the retail uses in the downtown.
So we'll just sort of be easing the requirements, but still asking questions of how you're going to do this.
Still taking into consideration individual design concepts. When they bring a project forward, you would have that opportunity. So that is something that we've talked about for quite a while and just haven't brought before you yet. We believe it probably benefits the downtown to allow for that additional flexibility. Again, one of the things to discourage destruction of historic buildings is to encourage reuse of them or modifications of the use of them. And anything above the ground floor is going to be either a retail or an office type space, or it's going to be a residential space. So let's encourage those spaces to be used. And that conforms very well with the plan, the corridor plan that you heard discussion of earlier when Leslie presented.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. And I'm going to turn this back to Bryn to talk to you about general plan updates.
Well, commissioners, lots to chew on today, right? It's kind of fun to just be able to yak about stuff for a change instead of having all applicant requests. General plan, we're in the window now, and as you know, we have a new mayor and some new council members on our council, and the mayor is actually setting up a mayor's review commission for the general plan update. So we'll be getting more information to you commissioners about what that process looks like going forward. But if we reflect back to the 2015 update, a community-based committee was convened in 2011, actually, started to be convened. And the writing process, we actually didn't use a consultant. The city ran its own process and provided updates to the prior general plan. That general plan went to the council for a vote of approval in late 2014 and then was placed on a ballot in 2015. We will be doing something similar with this one. We know we will have significant updates because we have some sections of the plan that don't even exist at this point. We don't have a sustainability portion. We don't have a climate change readiness portion. There are some things that have happened in land use law that we'd probably like to take a look at and incorporate, or at least use a new legal lens to view some of the parts of our plan that can be updated. So just wanted to throw this up as an introduction and let you know that we will be bringing you more updates regarding this process coming forward. And we're still getting some information from the mayor on his ideas and framework for that process.
In the past, we've always had the what I call the chicken and the egg concept. What comes first, approve rezoning or there's water available for. Is this going to be looked at too to see, do we keep the same thing that have to do the application for potential rezoning, then you do the review to see if there's water? Or if there's going to be a change in the water policy, would you need to look at, do we have the water before we even consider having those change in zoning?
Very timely mention of the water policy, because we're under an update of that policy currently, and I would encourage all of you to follow the council agendas upcoming, because there's going to be additional study sessions where those changes are looked at. They're incredibly important changes that do affect development, the rate of development, the pace of development. So that is definitely a part of the conversation, and that new policy will be adopted well in advance of the general plan process initiating. Okay. So you'll have a better idea of what that looks like as we approach the earliest phases of the general plan.
All right. That's it?
And I think that's it. Yeah.
All right.
Any other
staff
questions?
Updates? Tom, did you have any questions before we close? I guess
Yeah, I'm off mute now. I was going to ask George about the adequacy of our parking going forward. I know that wasn't really related to what he was talking about, but basically we're adding all these houses. Have we got enough parking? And if not, what can we do to facilitate creating more parking, even if it's paid parking? So if George could respond to that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, that's a good question. We have addressed, we've looked at parking in the downtown. So again, the issue that I brought up a moment ago was related almost entirely to the downtown business district. So it's just that central area on the map. Within that area, there is a more street parking than anywhere else in town. We've managed to create additional street parking with almost every city street improvement project that was done in the downtown. So we've added some parking. It's incremental, maybe a few spaces with each block that we've worked on. So additional parking is being created. It's not being created in the way that you would create, for instance, a new parking garage that was mentioned under the last presentation. The uses downtown generally function like an urban core would function, except our drivers and our shoppers really haven't figured out that we're an urban core. In most urban cores, people will park blocks away from where they're going to shop and walk. Here we have a lot of folks who will circle blocks looking for parking spaces very close to a business. That changes over time with the types of businesses and the encouragement for more pedestrian activity. In creating new parking in the downtown, it's probably going to be limited to something like Leslie talked about, the creation of a new parking structure, a contained structure that would be available for public parking. Those structures actually encourage the parking and walking, which is good for the businesses in the downtown. If you want to shop at one particular shop and you drive down here and park in front of it, chances are you're going to go into that shop, come out to your car, and leave. If you park 2 blocks away, you're going to pass 15 other shops to get to the one you came for, and your opportunity to shop at those increases. So generally, you want to be able to you want to try to encourage people to park and walk in the downtown. Making the parking on-site and available is probably the thing you don't want to do. So I don't know if that answered the question. We're incrementally increasing parking with street projects, and we have a potential under the proposal by the Granite Creek Corridor Plan to create another offsite or concentrated parking structure like we have at the south side of downtown. Somewhere on the north side of downtown, we're providing additional parking through both of those aspects. Now, parking garages are very expensive, and whether the city will pursue that in the near term is going to be a question council will have to address at some point as far as budgeting goes. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Well, not exactly, but kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, it does.
That was actually my intention.
Yeah, does our growth rate exceed our parking capability? And if so, what are we doing about it? That was the question.
Okay. And a slightly different answer to that is with growth rate, we're talking about additional uses in the downtown business district, because that's the only area that we were contemplating bringing before you to modify. So within those areas, we're growing at a very slow rate as far as new uses in the downtown. If we can encourage additional residential uses in the downtown, in the areas above the street level, then certainly we're going to be looking at a considerable additional demand for parking. And it will need to be addressed when that happens.
George, one of my excuse me, one of my other favorite phrases is "begin with the end in mind." Now, this morning from Leslie, we got a presentation of that concept of "begin with the end in mind," but it was all over the place, and it ought to be narrowed. I think the question that Tom is asking and the question that Don asked earlier are examples of "begin with the end in mind." For us to do a good job for the city of Prescott, we have to know that when a proposal comes in, it fits in with a plan.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
As you and I talked earlier, my longstanding issue has been why do we go through the evaluation process and not know how much does this spend down the water supply of Prescott? Or in Tom's question about parking, we're talking about, well, you know, we have parking decks and we have people living above buildings. We don't know. That's all up in the air. That doesn't tell us then when it comes time to approve an individual proposal, does it fit in with the plan of the look? Does it fit in with the plan of the parking? Does it fit in with the plan of traffic on the streets? So I would certainly encourage an effort when we're doing general planning to let us know what the end is, so we know that when we're individually evaluating something, does it fit in with the plan? More than just does it meet code?
And we can certainly do that. We do that with some areas of town now because they're covered by overlay plans. So we come in and tell you that this complies with the commercial corridor overlay color restrictions. We tell you those when we bring things forward. This rezoning conforms to the general plan. We tell you those. If the downtown corridor plan is adopted and put into effect that covers a good portion of downtown, we would do the same thing. So we're going to tell you as part of your evaluation what the criteria are of the plan and what the conformance is of the project. In addition, when we bring any of the things that we've talked about today forward to you, you're going to get a lot more data. It's certainly within our capability to bring you data on all of the available public parking in the downtown business district. I can give you a count of them. I can't today, but we'll have that for you. How many are in the garage? How many are on the street? That's something it's easily attainable data that will help you see that into picture. If we have 1,000 parking spaces and we have businesses that are coming to you and the cumulative requirement for parking is more than 1,000, we're going to have a problem. We need to be able to tell you that end number of how many parking spaces we have, and we can do that.
Any other questions?
Can we go home now?
Just about. Any staff updates, Bryn?
I don't believe so, other than what we've already provided.
Any time frame on when our meetings are going to be transitioning to a new location?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would love it if I had that answer. We're wondering the same thing. Currently, I believe at New City Hall, the focus is on getting the council offices ready, which will be on the third floor, and also the council chambers. So that's going to be the first phase of tenant improvements at the new building. And the second floor will be modified to house multiple departments. First floor will actually include the community development counter and all development services. So that much we know.
So if the new city council chamber is going to be there, does that mean our meetings are going to be there or they stay here?
Oh, our meetings are going to be there. This property is posed for redevelopment. very exciting.
Understand that. I'm just
Yep.
thinking more of a time frame on that.
We will be here probably, I mean, this is a complete ballpark. If I've talked with our facilities managers and probably the community development area is going to be the final piece. And also National Bank, that is one of the tenants on the base floor, is doing a tenant improvement to compress their operations into a smaller space. So all of that has to happen as well. So I would be surprised if we were in before the end of the year, actually.
Oh, okay.
But I haven't been provided any hard dates at this point.
Thank you.
So
Anything
thank
else?
you. I think that's it. Thank you so much, commissioners. This has been a great meeting.
Meeting's adjourned.
However-